Welcome to the People Strategy Forum podcast. We're a show that guides leaders on how to elevate the workforce, and we believe that people are at the heart of successful organizations. So, a team member's well being, their rewards, career development, it's all essential to a happy and healthy and highly productive workforce environment. So, this show discusses the practical and effective leadership strategies for top executives, senior professionals, and talent managers overall. So, first, I would like to introduce you to our hosts. And our host here today with us is Howard Niswitz. Howard is a seasoned HR and compensation advisor for over the past 30 years. And so we're very fortunate to have him here. And then also we have Shar Miller. She is a strategy and skills consultant at the Strategic Thinking Institute. She's also a talent management strategist and career entrepreneur and coach. So she helps a lot of you out there that are thinking about becoming an entrepreneur and how to transform from the corporate world into the career coach or consulting world. And also she's an expert at living in different places, and so she can help you make that transition effectively.
Yep, like you.
That's right. So today we explore the question, is your culture accidental or intentional? So we're thrilled to have with us Janine O'Neil, a co-founder of 11X Talent. So that's a firm that is reshaping how startups build their executive teams. With over 2 decades in the talent industry, Janine brings a wealth of knowledge in talent acquisition, leadership development, and strategic coaching. Her experience is particularly rich with early stage and growth stage companies, where she's passionately committed to aligning innovative talent strategies with the broader business objectives to fuel sustainable growth. So today, Janine will dive into the intentional culture rooted in shared values that can dramatically transform your organization. Her insights will illuminate the critical path from simply hiring talent to building a cohesive, powerful team driven by common goals. So let's learn how to craft a culture that is not just present by chance, but intentional by design. Welcome, Janine.
Thank you. This is so interesting and fun to have all of you to talk about this topic that I'm very passionate about.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. So the first thing I'd love to do as we dive in here is first understand a little bit of your background. I mean, we've been fortunate. I mean, Janine and I, for the listeners out there, Janine and I worked together years ago at Barclays and BlackRock, and before she's launched into other areas in her career. But so, Janine, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this particular niche and how you help your clients.
Well, I have been very fortunate that I started out my career in recruiting. And when you find something that just is such a perfect match with how you operate in the world, extroverted, love talking to people, love understanding problems and situations, love matchmaking. I feel like that was the beginning of what was an ideal career for me. And then it evolved, of course, in various ways, and getting to see a very strategic environment, I think, where exec search firms live, like Spencer Stewart or the Shrek firms, and then going in-house to a company like Barclays Global Investors, which was absolutely known for innovation, innovation among financial services firms and even among talent practices was very much at the forefront. I learned so much there, and then cut my teeth doing HR, not just talent acquisition. So I really loved being in an environment that was innovative. And so marrying the two, both recruiting and innovation, was really starting to get my juices flowing. And then I went into the tech world where at Sequoia Capital, I helped a lot of founders with their G&A and go-to-market recruiting from early stage companies to growth stage companies. So when I started this company, 11X Talent, last year, focused on go-to-market, it was really, again, pulling all those threads forward to the present day and really understanding some of the huge obstacles that exist for companies to scale. And one I love to talk about is culture.
Yeah, so it's a big piece. I mean, of course, today employees and candidates out there are looking for more than a paycheck. I mean, and culture is a big driver of why people decide to work where they want to work. So, can you tell us a little bit of what does it mean about being intentional about your culture versus accidental?
Well, culture exists whether you intend it or not. So
Mm,
it's the unwritten social order of the organization. And because it's unwritten, the big gap is, how do you understand the unwritten and turn it into something written? Written means it's cultural, it's intentional, and then you can make sure that the culture remains in the way that you want as you scale. So I think the unwritten thing could be, um, how do we make decisions? Are we consensus driven or is it top down? It could be everything from, are we direct communicators or are we more passive communicators? There's lots of ways that you can identify cultural tenets, and then the underlying values that drive that. There are a lot of examples of great cultures. At least we know those cultures because the companies are so successful and have scaled so well, like Amazon has 16 principles that they follow. And we kind of know that it started with customer obsession and that it led to a tremendously successful global company. Those things were written down, and those things helped everybody who joined Amazon know what the North Stars were. And I think that every company, like you said, culture can be a reason that people go to a company and a reason that people leave, again, regardless of
mhm.
whether it's codified in writing or just the social order that exists.
So, can you tell us a situation like when you've walked into a client to help them out, and you really haven't, you don't really see that writing on the wall. You don't really see a well communicated, intentional culture. So, what are the things that you would recommend to kind of transform their approach to be more effective?
So I think that a lot of people leaders are in this spot where they are charged with codifying a culture. If they don't get alignment with the executive, the leader, the founder, then really they're just operating in a vacuum. And that is not actually how culture works. It comes from the top, and the engagement about, why spend the time on an offsite talking about your culture and your, values. It really comes down to, if you need it, the driver that a good culture is a source of success in the company. And I'm not like making this up. There's plenty of books written about this, and I think the challenge though is pointing to the responsibilities
Hmm.
of creating the culture and knowing that it can't be coming only out of, the people leadership team. So I mean, I'm sure you've experienced observing companies where there's no codified culture, but where you could easily say, hey, this company, they have X culture. They're risk averse, so they can't innovate. These are the kind of connections that you can draw in a company that prevents the company from being more successful.
And we all know of those certain players out in the industry that are known for their cultural aspects. I mean, and that, I mean, for instance, we look at an ad from Apple Computer, and we think of innovation and the sleek designs, and sometimes the overboxing that they do and shipping their goods. And then, yeah, and then we think of Amazon and then their ability to just get in just about everywhere. As an organization that was once thought of just books, now they have everything. And so, every business has its own unique culture and so forth. But Shar, I'd love to dive in on your expertise in really ensuring that leaders are kind of living the culture in a way, and your experiences there, has that always been positive, or is there positive and negative pieces you can share with us?
Oh yeah, I was in charge of employee retention and engagement and all of those factors. Sitting at the executive table, having attempting to have conversations about culture, and a lot of those conversations are about where's the data, where's the data, how do we lop off the tail of disengaged employees. And unfortunately, we focus so much on lopping off the tail and driving culture with performance management and having our special 30 list of leaders that need to go and get off the bus. And it was a bit nerve-wracking. However, I'm very proud to say one of my regions of about 11 different chief HR officers and myself in healthcare, we were able to have high success rate and turnover and engagement. However, it's a very lonely road when you're sitting at the table and attempting to have those conversations, those crucial conversations. And in my opinion, I think, and I'm a strategy person, I think talent management strategy must be embraced at the executive room and senior leadership room. And it's not just, like you said, Janine, it's not just people, the people leaders that are saying, well, let's look at the Gallup employee survey. This is our exercise to determine what we're going to do to fix our culture. And I would attempt to say, no, it's about visibility, authenticity, assuring that we hardwire our time with our employees to get to know them and really have a concrete way in our hands, in our smartphones, to really be able to facilitate a dialogue about performance and competency and talents and strengths. It's not about sitting in the boardroom looking at a PowerPoint and saying, oh, look at our data from the last 10 years or last 5 years, So what do you think, Janine?
Yeah, well, so here's an angle there, because so many legacy companies are looking over their shoulder, afraid of being disrupted by some Silicon Valley company coming after their space. And there's a critical cultural difference that exists in the legacy player, which is they want to preserve the land they have, and therefore taking risks is really not rewarded. So sometimes it's punished, but it's for sure not rewarded. And so as a result, they are caught flat-footed, and then other players that are more innovative can take their space and take their market share. That's largely in the tech companies that I support and work with. It's all about innovation being part of the culture and risk-taking being not just allowed, but rewarded. So, I mean, I think that if you are in a spot where you are leading a company that is worried about being displaced through innovation, how do you structure, even a people leader, like the rewards that exist for taking risks that don't result in you getting fired? Like this is a balancing act, but I don't think a lot of companies even have the stomach to know what that looks like. So they talk about innovation, but they don't change their way of performing or rewarding to reflect that.
Well, I have to comment on that as an afterthought. We tried to do an HR program that was like bright ideas. It was and it had, of course, I designed it. There was a little light bulb, bright ideas, kind of like comp team's light bulb, and then it came down to the report of how many ideas were submitted. What's the cost savings? What it comes down to finances, how much time it took our employee to come up with the idea. And again, it became a tactical activity of discussing the report. And instead of, hey, George, or whoever, thank you for that excellent idea. This is, not only did it help us with door-to-dock times or all this, healthcare related initiatives. And then also we appreciate that you took the risk, like you say, and took the time to come up with these innovative ideas, and really thank them. And again, it was a tactical activity. It was not strategic, and it was not aligned to our culture very well. And I admit I was in charge of the program, but it was also very challenging to make it successful. I would say as a result.
Yeah. I mean, I love this particular cultural or like value piece because it does speak to the divide between
Mhm.
companies that endure. I mean, you can look at letters from to shareholders at Amazon dating back, 20 years, and the whole point is we're taking your money and we're going to invest it into evolving this company. So it's an incredible example for everybody. One way that you can, as a founder and starting up and wanting to identify what your best, you know, cultural values will be, or how to start out, is to look at some of the best, most successful companies in the world. Look at the 16 principles at Amazon. And Samsara is an example that I'll share because know someone who worked there from the very early days, and Sanjit Biswas looked at the principles, reviewed Andy Grove's high output management, Netflix culture of stunning colleagues and seeking excellence. And because it was a startup, he didn't pick 16, he picked 4. But he kind of put 2 on the back burner and focused on 2, customer obsession and another one. So everybody can look at what's existed before. You don't have to create out of whole cloth if you feel like that's not where you want to spend your time. But these super successful companies did this work, and it does show that there's a tremendous link between a good culture and success.
Yeah.
And whether it's driven by your people leader that you lean on, or you the founder are doing it, like, this is really, really important.
Janine, how do you assess when there's a mismatch between the culture that top management may feel that's there versus the reality of what employees are experiencing?
Well, that happens a lot, doesn't it?
It does.
I mean, I for sure, and I'm sure you've seen this, we've done this amazing offsite. We're going to like go have an all hands and roll out our vision and values, and
Right.
The work gets put in the drawer, and then the drawer gets closed. And so what the antidote is to really incorporate this into everything that you do. So that means recruiting, talent acquisition. How are the values incorporated into the interview process? I know 2 great companies that I can think of that lead front and center with having the company's values incorporated into the interview process. So they're very careful about who they hire because they actually don't want to dilute their culture. They don't want to have someone who's going against the grain. It's so important for their success to keep that consistent culture. So it's incorporated there. It's incorporated into KPIs. So you have them in, all hands meetings, in even other more, smaller group meetings, just to reinforce, hey, does this activity, let's just say it's customer obsession, does this activity align with our goal of customer obsession? No? Okay, scrap it. We're not doing it. So this is the antidote, is do not put that thing in a drawer.
And so let's dive into that a little bit more. And I'd love to hear your experience there, Howard. I mean, I know that you have been a leader of large teams, compensation teams in your career. And part of your job as a leader was to ensure that you're bringing in people that have values that are aligned with the organization and are aligned with your team's culture. And so how did you go about ensuring this alignment?
Well, one of the things that I did that was very successful was not only did I spend time, interviewing the candidates, but I had team members of the team individually spend time with the candidates as well. So it wasn't just, Howard's making a decision, bringing someone in, and he's got to accept this person. It really was a team decision. And it also allowed the candidate to get a sense of the different personalities of the team and sort of what the day-to-day life in the team was. So that was very successful. And all of us talked to what we did and how we did it and how we interacted with one another.
So, and Janine, in helping, what kind of guidance would you give Howard in ensuring that the culture is preserved as an organization, as a hiring manager? How do you talk to your hiring managers to ensure that they are able to preserve the culture through their candidates that they bring on?
So it doesn't, I mean, I love that you're doing that, Howard. I think that's really important to kind of get other perspectives when someone's being interviewed. Then they see, okay, does this culture live and is it embodied by how people do work? And because culture, unless it's codified, can be amorphous, really defining what is most cared about. So I think using those words and then using those words not just in the interview, but in regular team meetings, again, in the KPI setting process. You also want to make sure that other senior leaders are using similar language. And then ideally, it's coming down also from whoever the CEO is, and that all the other execs are responsible for the company culture and they're, stewards of the culture. So that's, I would say, really important. I mean, people leaders have, a lot of creativity and inventiveness around things that you can do. Who identify culture carriers is one example, and have that be, a coveted or, a position of respect. So I really think you're doing good stuff, and keep doing that. And then there's always probably more, but I think
Then,
coming is great.
then there has to be accountability as well. You could have a rock star that just ruffles everyone's feathers, doesn't fit in. And, does management look at that and say, yeah, you may be doing great, but you're really a bad fit. You don't fit our culture, and you're disruptive. And I think that's something employees pick up on right away.
That's a great point. I think one way to put it is sometimes like, what's our, do we have an appetite for really brilliant assholes running around? And you probably, at some point, maybe they sort of become that way, or it doesn't show up in the interview. And then, what harm are they doing is a question. Like, is the work in, collaborative in nature, and people don't collaborate with them? And then if it's a collaborative culture and that's a KPI, then you can really performance manage that. But so I don't think most of us have, life's too short for too many of that type to be to work with. And I definitely talk to a lot of people who leave companies because that person could be a senior person. And that's very damaging. And again, no one says intentionally our culture is going to have like a bunch of brilliant a-holes around. But when it happens, that's unintentional, and it really only takes a founder or CEO to address that, unless, of course, that person is the
yeah, financial services was especially tricky in that regard.
Well, again, this sort of alignment is around, do you want to be a brilliant a-hole or do you want to be successful? I think it's that simple. And there's plenty of examples of companies that don't go the distance because they can't get over themselves.
And I think that brings up a great real life example that probably we've all experienced, is that you're running forth, maybe you have a great cohesive leadership team, and then somebody leaves, or you're growing, and there's a new a leader or new executive that is brought onto the team, and it can cause the culture to shift in some situations. Have you experienced that, Janine?
I hear about it all the time from founders, because in my work of hiring go-to-market leaders, CMOs, CROs, if the company has already had one in place, the biggest reason that person didn't work out is culture.
Mhm.
And one thing I do see a lot of is founders falling in love with logos. Oh, that's a good company, so they must be good.
Mhm.
And, not everybody from every company is either responsible for the goodness that happened or is the right culture fit for your company. So, a lot of times you'll see people from big companies going to small companies. That doesn't work out. And there's just a lot of examples. They're fairly everyday examples. So when I talk to founders about really what they need for their stage, it should really emphasize a cultural fit and matching size and scale of company they've been in. I mean, I think because I have so many examples, I won't say any specific companies or details, but it just happens all the time.
And I think that is one of the big problems that organizations have as they're growing. I mean, as you mentioned, you work with a lot of those developing organizations, ramping up quickly. And as when we think of some of the most influential founders out there, I mean, they're very creative. They can be very hands-on and ensuring excellence in every area. But as you grow, it becomes more difficult to do that, and sometimes the lack of delegation becomes a problem. Uh, what kind of growing pains have you witnessed in your career?
Ugh. Well, I I don't mind when a founder wants to meet a lot of candidates. I think even for people that don't directly report to her or him, the candidates love being able to meet the founder. And very
Mhm.
often you're signing up to meet that, to really signing up to join for that person. However, it is not long-term scalable if you're a growing company. So back to the idea that a culture interview should be part of the interview process. It does bring both the leaders that are then hiring the next group, the next generation, if you will. They are able to almost be a proxy for the founder, understand very crystal clear what is the culture of the company, how does work get rewarded, sort of the unwritten rules, but now they're written, um, that the company, has all sorts of cultural elements to it. And as long as that is passed down from the CEO to other executives and then it becomes part of an interview process, then the reason for the founder to interview everybody and to be the sort of too involved when they have higher better use elsewhere is really to impart what needs to be imparted to other people as your proxy. That's really how you can scale.
Ensuring you're delegating well, is that the core message there?
I mean, I I don't know if I would go that far.
Mhm.
I think that a lot of times when you're growing a company, you want so delegating for interviewing is one thing. Delegating for all decisions is a whole separate universe
Sure.
of activities. So I think delegating for interviewing so that you can scale, that has to happen. It just has to.
Mhm.
Then, you know, delegating when key decisions need to be made. I'm a big proponent of that. However, there are certain, executive team decisions that have to happen regardless of the function. I think a lot of founders care so much about the company. They want to be involved, and you can be involved lightly with lots of curiosity so that you hired experts that are, your chief revenue officer, your chief marketing officer, being involved and then also being a resource. Some of the most successful companies know how to use their founder in closing deals and going out to the market and talking to customers. So there's a lot of utility in making sure that it's a cohesive and not purely delegated involvement.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that it's always important to realize that in some places a leader can delegate some tasks and duties and so forth, but ultimately they're always held fully accountable for the organization and proper delegation, right? So, but the other thing I think that is important is in your experience, you've worked with a lot of organizations that are rapidly scaling. And when you are small and mighty, you can easily define what that culture is. It's held by a few people, but then as you expand, you get more and more people. In some instances, there can be. Is there harder to maintain culture as it get diluted in a certain aspect as you're bringing on more people? How do you maintain that?
So I do think it gets diluted. And I do think for the most part, it is very hard to maintain the founding culture. And part of the reason it's hard is that founders and leaders at an early stage company underestimate that the more hiring happens, the harder it is to, and well, also and remotely, the harder it is to make sure that the culture is retained. So I would point out that sometimes people think that the offsites focused on culture and values are not a good use of time. And the counter argument to that is it is the best use of your time if you're actually scaling. If you're not hiring anybody, fine. But if you are, you better use that time wisely because you can incorporate culture into every step of your business. Hiring people, all hands meetings, rewarding people and KPIs, just it's part of everything you do. And when I would just call out, and I'm not like a Amazon fan, but there is not another scaled company that could easily say we can't do it because we're so scaled. Look what Amazon does. They're in every corner of the planet, and their culture is the 16 values. The leadership principles are everywhere. So it's just an excuse to say you can't do it because it can be done. And there's a template for it.
We're in a time of automation and technological innovation. There's artificial intelligence out there, and it's working its way in. Well, it has worked its way into recruiting platforms and the recruiting process overall.
Yeah.
So, can that type of automation and the use of artificial intelligence help or hinder the cultural aspect of recruiting correctly?
Wow, Sam. I mean, okay. I have a couple thoughts, but I would love to hear what you all think because it's a little bit of there's a little bit of a road ahead and then it sort of gets foggy and then there's a turn. Like, I don't know. One thing that comes to mind is the concept of ethics. So if it helps a recruiter, then it certainly can help a candidate, and a candidate could, present a different self in a way than what is really there. So, I mean, we should all leverage Gen AI and technology to increase our productivity and not do all the tasks that are just kind of rote kind of tasks. The idea that culture if culture involves just asking questions, then probably you can do that with Gen AI. But if culture is digging deep and having a conversation about behaviors and experiences, then I don't think Gen AI can do that yet.
Mhm.
Now, I think probably it will be in the future. I mean, it's becoming more of a human kind of interaction. But I think for people who would be working somewhere, they will prefer a face-to-face discussion if it's digging on culture. I think I personally would.
Well, here's a perspective that I have on that. That's pretty interesting. And I always talk about stories and personal experiences. I was interviewing for a chief HR officer position, went through extensive AI. Well, back then we probably didn't call it AI, but very much automated process and and speaking doing an interview on a chat box and all of those factors. I mean, I went through hoops and bounds and took personality assessment, and I was one of the best apparently. And it did come down to culture, because by the time I got to the executive boardroom table, the culture in me did not fit. um, Most of the executive team was I could tell that I was doing quite well in the interview, but by the time the CEO walked into the room, that CEO, she just targeted one little piece of my resume that she didn't like, and it was a gap in my employment when I was taking care of my ill mother. And so at that point, I knew it was, only less than a year, and I was taking care of my mother who passed away. But anyway, the point is that showed me that this executive, the CEO, had no compassion, dignity, or respect, which violates my values.
Yeah.
And she walked in 20 minutes late, and it just was, I mean, after all those hours of all those electronic and all of that work I did, plus multiple interviews, it was extreme turn off. And in fact, I took a family member to that hospital, that same location, and it gave me the EBGBs just driving in front of the entrance, thinking, wow, I am so glad I didn't get that position. I would have been miserable in that position. So when I started my own company, I decided, no, I'm not going to do this way. I'm going to use one of our sponsors as the TMA and really align my interview process to the competencies and really use that face-to-face, and also be very transparent about the culture, the opportunities, the good, bad, and the ugly. And I think the employees really appreciated the honesty and as we built our team. So I agree with you, Janine. It all works together.
Yeah.
And so I do have a little bit of bad taste in my mouth about just relying on technology, because it can be a hard experience for a candidate.
Right. What an awful experience too. And you dodged a bullet in not joining.
Yeah. I was going to be the chief HR officer in this environment. I was already behind the 8 ball at the interview.
Very sorry about that.
Well, that's okay.
And your loss.
But I think those lessons that you learn, I think, make you a better talent management strategist. And also the struggles of a recruiter that has a span of control with over 40 or 50, 60 job openings. I'm sure you can relate. And the span of control can be so much. It's really difficult for that recruiter to really have all those face-to-face conversations. And they are under the pressure too to have days to fill and all of those things that I actually empathize for my colleagues in recruitment. And I do think that it does require collective conversation of how we can do this better together and work as a team to do our recruitment process. So.
I have another question, actually. With more people working remotely, some of them hardly ever go into the office, and other people, splitting their time with, days in the office and days working from home. How do you get over that challenge? Because you don't have that day-to-day interaction, and you don't get a sense of the culture if you're only interacting with people on Zoom.
Well, this work environment is different from what we've seen in the past.
Mm-hmm.
In the past, of course, there was a movement among sort of the work culture called ROW, results only workplace, if you remember that. And it was intended to not babysit people,
Right.
but to focus on outcomes. And that movement, I think, had a place, and it was more of an innovative approach. And I think I saw it a lot more in California than New York, for example. And I think now, by default, remote work is a bit results only, because you can't have somebody at home being monitored on a Zoom call, even though they're not actually on the Zoom call. They're doing their work and you're seeing their results. I think from a cultural perspective, it's going to be something that we will have a lot more data about in 10 years. It's hard to know right now.
Right.
I've heard many anecdotes, and I was involved in two examples of employees who were at home, and they felt that their manager was being too harsh in asking, like, what are you working on? And where's the results? And what are you doing? And whether it's generational or just of that moment in time, it was about a year and a half ago, of people just feeling like, well, I'm at home, I'm working. What do you care what my results are? I mean, I have no idea because it's hard for me to relate to that situation. But I think we'll have, um, again, if you go back to, um, was this clarified in an interview? And a lot of people who are super early in their career don't fully grasp that
Right.
company has paid you for your time and your work, and you have to produce results or you're not performing. So that whole concept still seems to be a bit tricky when we've got companies that are remote and inexperienced employees.
So as we get in, I mean, this Howard brings up a good point. I mean, just bringing up the remote work angle of this. When we think about companies out there, there are some companies that are, fully remote and virtual by nature. What competencies, what skills do leaders need to have in that type of an environment to be successful? So when you're recruiting and for a fully remote executive, and what are the unique things that you're looking for?
Well, there's often, if it's a remote executive, there's already a foundation of performance, and you can attribute success to various things they've done, prior companies, and then deep referencing. So I have a few things that I would say are critically important. One would be communicating, and an over communicator is better in a remote situation than someone who just likes to work away and then kind of, ta-da, here's what I did. Sort of that high communicative person is more successful and viewed as more successful. The other key piece as a leader, if you're an executive, the tendency in work situations when you're in an office to sometimes skip the team, your one-on-one meetings, just like, oh, I'm so busy right now, can we just skip, I'll talk to you later. You just can't do that. And so you have to have a very disciplined approach to leading, and respectful of other people's time, and being really very present and available. I mean, there's other examples that I would call out in the remote world, which could be having office hours. And in-person office hours can be great because it is, hey, my door is open, but you could have an open Zoom and have people pop in and out as they wish. So in the office hours concept, it can be very effective. Again, interviewing for a culture that's remote, and it is not true that we've never had remote companies. We've had remote companies before. And then if you really think about it, every multinational, there are leaders that have had teams in other time zones. So there are some best practices, and it can for sure work. And I would say, I think I would put my odds behind executives being effective versus new talent. And I really do wish that companies would not hire people fresh out of college into remote companies. Just my opinion.
Yes, for sure. And so, Janine, we are coming up to the end of our time here today. So as we think about all that we've discussed, what do you want our listeners to walk away with in the key themes?
I want you to know that successful companies have codified culture and values, and it's not a squishy topic. So if you're driving to get better results in your company, incorporate the codified culture and values into every part of the process. And you're making a huge contribution if you're a people leader and getting codified values.
Great. Well, for our listeners out there that want to learn more about you and in the services that you provide, what are the best ways for them to understand more about your services and how to contact you?
Find me on LinkedIn, Janine O'Neil, at 11X Talent, And you can also email me, Janine, Janine, at 11xtalent.com. 11 is written out as the number written out.
And how do you help organizations, bring in the best people?
We have a very involved process, not unlike a lot of exec search firms, except that we are very laser focused and only do go-to-market roles. That's marketing, sales, and customer success from director level and above. And we work with private companies, either VC backed or private equity backed. And my business partners are operators. My partner David Kane is a former CMO, and he's great at truly going very deep with any marketing leader. And then my other partner, Regan Kane, is a former chief people officer and has a deep bench of talent acquisition work in her background. So we're very good at advising early stage companies. Here's an interview process. Here are competencies. Here's a presentation presentation suggestions for go-to-market roles. And we just work very closely to find the best culture and the best functional talent for the company.
Well, this has been great having this conversation with you today, Janine. Thank you so much for bringing all your wisdom to the world today.
Thank you.
Sam, thank you. Howard, you are great
Look
to see
forward
you
to
guys.
connecting on LinkedIn. We just did.
All right, perfect.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye all.
Thank you. And we'll see everyone else on the People Strategy Forum next week. So take care, everyone.